Hi, I'm James Brookes, and welcome to From the Factory Floor, a conversational podcast about all things startup and tech, brought to you by the folks at Thestartupfactory.tech. And welcome back to the first episode of From the Factory Floor in 2024. As ever, I'm your host, James, and I'm kindly rejoined by my co-host, Nairi.
Hi.
Have a nice break?
Yeah. Can we say Happy New Year?
Is
it still...
It dates the podcast a little bit, but we can, I guess.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year all. And to kick off 2024, we're very kindly joined by Rob. Hi, Rob.
Hi, good morning. Oh, no, it's good afternoon. Oh, God. I've messed
Good morning,
it
good afternoon, good evening, good night, which was
depending on when
you're
listening to it. Thanks very much for joining us. So, Rob Bowley, just to give an intro to everybody, you operate as a fractional CTO working with startups, scale-ups and beyond. We've talked quite a lot around fractional and the role of a CTO in a startup. So it's great to have you on here and get your expertise. I know you spoke at our Pragmatic CTO event that was towards the end of the summer last year, and it was hugely valuable to everybody that attended. But before we kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty, it'd be great if you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself and how you work and who you work with.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks very much for inviting me on. It's great to be here.
Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, so Whistle Stop Tour, I've been working in tech for nearly 25 years now. Started as a developer probably about 1999. Spent most of my career in startups and scale-ups. Spent most of my career in London and moved to Manchester about 6 or 7 years ago now. Moved into leadership positions probably about 13 or 14 years ago now, where I and that was in startups and some scale-ups in London. So that's what I've been doing throughout that time. So CTO or equivalent at anything from very early stage startups to some scale-ups in London, one called 7 Digital and another called Masabi, who are still doing very well. And then I moved to Manchester and joined some very big shops. I was the head of digital technology at the Co-op, leading the digital transformation there for about 4.5 years, and then moved to Money Supermarket, where I had about 200 engineers I was responsible for. But then got to that point of my career where I'd been doing the leadership gig quite a few times and finding it was kind of doing the same things, basically. And felt that there was a different way I could add value. And particularly after working in some very big organizations, very keen to get back to startups. So last year, I took the leap to going out on my own and setting up Pragmatic Partners, working as a portfolio CTO or more fashionably called a fractional CTO these days, or CPTO. I do the product side of things as well. I'm particularly passionate around the Northwest as well, even though I'm a Southerner, very keen, as I have been ever since I moved to Manchester, to help grow the Northwest ecosystem, and particularly where I'd had all that experience in startups down in London, being able to apply it here. So yeah, that's what I've been doing for 6 or 7 months now. I'm working with a variety of different startups, most of them across the Northwest, so Liverpool and Manchester. In this fractional capacity, so anything from sort of advisory role of maybe a day or 7 hours or so a month, anything up to a day a week. And I also do due diligence for investors as well. So I did 3 last year and possibly have another one coming up as well. I'm really enjoying it. I've got to say, if I had sort of thought about where I might be in 6 months' time from when I started, it wouldn't have been anywhere to the point where I am. And I'm really loving doing it across a lovely wide variety of different Northwest startups and scale-ups.
I mean, the scale and difference of, what the startups are in the Northwest, I think so much happens in London that it's nice to hear someone, talk so passionately about what's going on, whether it's Manchester, Leeds or Liverpool. I mean, I think probably as a start for 10, Rob, I think just for the folks out there, obviously taking on that sort of CTO or product role on a more fractional basis, what's the role of the fractional CTO in comparison to, when people are actually getting a full-time CTO?
Not much different, I would say. I think the difference for me is in the sense that, let's say at Money Supermarket, I was responsible for something like, I can't remember if it was 15 or 20 teams across different areas of the organization. It's now that I have that responsibility of across actual different organizations as well, but what I'm doing is broadly similar. The problems are broadly common and the same. It's obviously just that when you're at the scale of something like Money Supermarket or the Co-op, where they're highly regulated, versus an early stage startup, it's about the right kind of level of pragmatism for what they need. You certainly can't apply a lot of the practices in the same way as you would from a big organization to a smaller one, but the themes are very common.
When would you say is the right time for a startup, particularly for a non-technical founder, to start looking at bringing in a CTO, fractional CTO, scaling out their tech team?
I would say the sooner that you could be speaking to someone like me, the better.
Yeah.
And that's because what I have found is there are a lot of common problems that people get into, which are really avoidable very early on. And quite typically, as an early stage founder, you're working with a delivery partner to build your MVP, and there are just so many avoidable problems. But unfortunately, so many of them do get into the situation where they spend a lot of money and find out it's not what they thought it was going to be, and also then very beholden to those technology partners who are often actually running their infrastructure for them, and then really getting stuck and not knowing where to go. And these are often very easy problems to solve early on. However, the challenge for folks at that early stage is they're not very cash rich.
Yeah.
And so often I do a lot of work pro bono on that perspective. The sooner I could be speaking to people to be helping them avoid these things, the better. And I really enjoy doing that, because what I would much prefer is not going in and cleaning up after the mess that gets created, but helping them to develop their proposition. I'm actually currently working on an ebook I'll eventually get to giving away for free, basically, which is all about that early stage. How do you build your MVP, and what are those things to watch out for? But I think particularly the value then comes in sort of beyond that, is if you're working with a delivery partner and you're not a technology person, it the challenge is you just don't know how to work well with them, no matter how good the delivery partner is. If you're not able to kind of communicate in the right way around what you want, then that's often where things get stuck as well. So I would say the sooner the better, but obviously the challenge is cost from that perspective.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in terms of whether it's understanding whether it's a CTO you need or somebody that's more on the kind of the delivery side, could you just talk us through kind of what the different roles might be that a startup might be looking for in terms of fractional support on the tech side? I did, we were talking just off air, weren't we, about a post you'd done on LinkedIn recently about whether or not you might need a founding engineer or a CTO, and what the kind of main differences are.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of startups get caught in the trap of advertising for a CTO when it's not actually a CTO. What they're looking for is, as I've kind of termed it, or stole from someone else the idea of a founding engineer. They actually need someone a lot more hands-on, whereas PTO or a CTO is a lot more of a strategic role. It's a lot more of a long-term focus on how you go from where you are today to where you want to get to. That's the thing. But also I actually often say as well, actually, do you even need to hire anybody yet? And even further back from that is, do you even need to build anything yet? So I often find that people jump in too quickly thinking they need to build things when they haven't done the user research or the prototyping or using other tools like no-code platforms to try out their idea before spending 40 to 100K on an MVP.
Yeah.
It's the often thing we've seen recently is people, giving up people advice to move to low code, or, I think some of the best ideas we've seen are people who've bootstrap that very early stage to get all the user feedback before they've even, approached, people like ourselves to actually build the MVPs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some great examples of some of my clients. So Financial, who are based in between Liverpool and Manchester, they just started with a WhatsApp group and selling PDFs to people around, how to plan and how to sort of budget from the perspective of women. And another local startup in Manchester, Syntho, provides a platform, an education platform for people learning how to produce music, started putting videos on a video platform and selling them there. They were able to prove that there was a value proposition that people were willing to pay for before they invested money in going and building something, and also proving that there was a need to go and build something which you couldn't, get from a standard platform.
Yeah, fab. And in terms of working with businesses that have got the MVP, how do you handle, or what some of the challenges you have with founders that have an Airbnb kind of vision? So we get a lot of startups that will say, well, I wanted to do this, like Airbnb or Uber. The trendy phrase at the minute, isn't it, is it's the Uber of something. And actually, it's understanding the MVP isn't a final product. It's to just get you to the next stage. To build the funds to get you to the next stage, and it's that kind of iterative journey. I just wondered from a CTO and a tech perspective, how do you handle some of those dynamics and conversations of founders that are almost a bit embarrassed perhaps sometimes around the MVP because it isn't a finished product. It was never what was in the vision for the long term.
Well, that's an interesting one. It does have to come down to ruthless focus on prioritization and into what it really means to be an MVP. And, I always recommend to people, if they haven't read it, start with reading The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And also there's the cost perspective. I mean, too often people are building too much. They're building far more than they actually need at that early stage to go and prove out their proposition. So it really is, like you say, with that MVP, is getting to that first proof point, which you can then iterate from. And also, I think people might have quite inflated expectations of where they could get to very quickly, and actually need to be prepared for it to be a long, gradual growth journey, especially in the current investment landscape, which I actually think is more healthy and is going to develop more sustainable businesses in the long term. But there is this ambition they have that maybe in 2 or 3 years they're going to have this massive exit, and actually they really need to be ready for a longer journey. There's some stats I saw on a Twitter post recently which showed it can be anything up to sort of 7 or 8 years until you get to that sort of exponential growth point.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think you're probably one of the first people that has come on and talked about founders building too much, because I think most founders, particularly at that early stage, think they're not building enough. They haven't got enough features and benefits. They haven't got enough on the product roadmap. And actually, it's interesting that you kind of strip that right back and say they're probably building too much. And I think that for me links back to your first point around the earlier they're engaging with somebody like you, that's going to help them refine that product roadmap, really kind of saves them in the long term from building features and benefits that's not needed at that point. And in terms of people thinking fractional is like a freelancer, or there is a bit of there has been a bit of negative publicity around bringing in loads of external people that aren't as invested in the business as the founder is, and the founder needs to have all of these skills. What would you say to that, or what do you think the benefits are of working fractionally with a CTO or a C whatever, versus bringing somebody in full time or leaving it too long to hire?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, it starts with leadership. Acting in that kind of C-suite capacity is you are fully invested. You couldn't do this kind of role if you were giving the impression that you weren't there, and acting as if you were part of that leadership team, and being as invested as the founder in how to drive that forward. Otherwise, that's not leadership. I think it can be challenging if you've got a myriad of contractors and people kind of part-time at those kind of other levels in the organization, because it's very hard to kind of get them engaged. But that's just part of leadership for me. And I think the interesting thing around that kind of, well, you know, you're not getting someone full time, is they don't need someone at that level full time. It's all about impact over effort. And I think that's one of the interesting learnings for me over the last sort of 6 or 7 months, is I can have a 5-minute conversation which can be quite transformational for them. It doesn't need someone being in there full time. They could not justify that full time, and they couldn't afford it full time either.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as somebody that works fractionally as well, I think the other thing as is you get ruthless efficiency, don't you? Because we have to be super efficient, which means that you don't have somebody that is in unnecessary meetings or involved in things that they don't need to be involved in, because you know that you've only got a certain amount of hours or days that you need to deliver for that.
And you also tailor it around the client's needs, right? So, you know, I'm only working as much as they need me.
Yeah.
Sometimes they want me more. Sometimes these things can fluctuate and change, but you know, it really is about, like you say, you know, any client I start working with, I start with an assessment and a discovery phase to kind of work out what they've got, and from that understand, well, you know, this is how much of my time I think you can need. So, like I say, some clients, you know, sort of 7 or 8 hours a month. Some is 7 or 8 hours a week, and potentially that could be even more. But yeah, you're getting that kind of right balance of cost and impact and value.
Yeah, you're paying for what you need, essentially, aren't you? So obviously, Rob, you've got loads of experience with the big multinational kind of organisations, with the co-op, money, supermarket, etc. And then you've gone down to startups, you know, from kind of startup to scale up. What's some of the common mistakes that you see startups make that you think are easily avoidable? So you talked around that kind of the earlier you can have those conversations with them, the better. There are obviously common themes there. I just wondered if you could share some of those with us and perhaps help head off some of the mistakes that people might make in the future.
Yeah, I think building too soon. So this comes into what we were discussing earlier, of thinking you have to actually go and build something to prove the proposition. Building too much at that stage as well is often a common one I see. Not owning your own stuff. It's really sad how many people I've spoken to over the last 6 months where they've realized they don't even own the IP for the code that's been written, let alone having it in their own source control repository. You know, they're caught up in a situation where this partner owns the code, doesn't have any documentation, is hosted on their infrastructure. They're now having problems with that delivery partner, and they can't move away. And really this just getting very beholden to them. So the technology partner deciding what technologies are going to be used. And then you end up with some esoteric technology stack, which is very hard to hire developers for. I think more broadly, I would say a lot of what I'm doing with these founders is coaching them around strategy. So this is probably more common when it's getting sort of beyond the very early stage, scale up, where it's very hand to mouth. And you're just trying to get something out and prove your proposition, to being able to need to think and focus more strategically and slightly more longer term. And they are caught in this cycle of being very hand to mouth and very reactive around the decisions that they're making. So curiously, probably at least half of my clients, I've spent as much time working on their wider organizational strategy and focus as I have on the technology side of things. And then just many common challenges around the kind of delivery practices where they're just not experienced with working with a delivery partner, working with developers, to how to get a really effective engine of delivery.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's really useful. And just to go back to your earlier point, so you do work pro bono, or you offer advice to founders if they're kind of listening to this thinking, actually, I could do with a second opinion or having a chat with somebody about it. What's the best way of getting in touch? And are you happy for people to contact you directly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think send me a message on LinkedIn, or go to pragmaticpartners.co.uk and send me an email. I'm particularly passionate about, especially in the Northwest, speaking to people before they've built something. And I have plenty of time for people that do that. The challenge is, I mean, I'm a mentor on the which is the one, the exchange department.
On exchange.
And I think one of the conditions to get onto that is you've already built something, so it's kind of already too late.
Yeah.
And like I say, particularly, I'm speaking to lots of people on a kind of pro bono basis, just kind of advising them on the right way to go about selecting a technology partner, challenging them on what they have done to actually prove their proposition before they've gone and built it. And I've ended up just writing the same email so many times now. Like I say, I want to get this little ebook finished so I can just give it away for free and kind of save me having to write the same email kind of so many times. And yeah, particularly in the Northwest, right? I mean, what's lovely here is since I moved to Manchester, I've seen the ecosystem around startups just really explode.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. But what I really want to help them with is getting that kind of great start to start things in the right direction. And you never know, that might mean I get to work with them in a few years' time, but more hopefully around actually growing than fixing.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And it's lovely, like James said earlier on, to see somebody move from London up to Manchester and support that ecosystem. We see, I don't want to get into a London-Manchester divide, but we do see a difference in how easy it is for early stage founders to raise in London off an idea versus Manchester and up here, and how hard people work to fund their startup. And we want to make sure, I think we're all in the same page, but we want to make sure that funding goes the right way, whether that is, we've advised people before, haven't we, to go away and build an interactive PDF. You don't need a piece of tech yet. And we're really passionate. I think we're all really passionate about working with people at the right stage, but avoiding mistakes and making that money work a bit harder for them. So that's great. And just to box them off, you mentioned they're pragmatic partners. So is that the business that you operate under?
Yeah,
under the CTO banner. So that's fab. So we'll pop your pragmatic partners details into the description box, and obviously your LinkedIn profile as well. So and hopefully you won't be too inundated, but I think it will be really useful for people to be able to get in touch with you and just get that second opinion and get that early stage advice. And come back to us when your ebook's done, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
we'll share that
around as well.
Shared with, yeah.
yeah. I've written half of it. I just need to finish it now. But yeah, I'm finding delightfully myself really busy with work, so that's great. Yeah. So hopefully it'll be out before the spring.
Right. Okay. Well, you made a commitment now, Rob. I'm going to come back to you in the spring and ask for the link to the ebook.
Public knowledge now. Well, no, Rob, really appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Nairi.
Thank you, James.
Right, and for everyone listening, thank you very much, and we'll catch you on the next one. I think that just about wraps things up here. If you have any thoughts or questions on anything we said today, get in touch, whether that be through our Twitter @RealTSF or email at hello@Thestartupfactory.tech, or feel free to drop in for a coffee and a chat. As ever, thanks for listening.